Sometimes one story can change our understanding of human strength. This is the story of a soldier who went through the fire of war, lost much, but found even more meaning, hope, and a new mission. You will witness the journey from pain and despair to victory over himself. Stay with us until the end, because it is the finale of this story that proves true victory begins after the war. Anthony Villarreal was born and raised in a small town in the American South, where everyone knew each other by name and unfamiliar faces were immediately noticed. The streets were quiet, the houses simple but cozy, and life flowed steadily, like a river that knew no rapids. Rarely did anything unusual happen there. And it was precisely this simplicity that gave the town its special charm. From an early age, Anthony was drawn to mechanics. He could spend hours in the garage, watching his father repair an old pickup truck. The smell of oil, gasoline, and metal seemed familiar to him, almost homelike. When the engine came to life after a long repair, the boy felt a thrill, as if he himself had breathed life into the iron heart of the machine. Over time, he became a master himself. Working in the auto repair shop, Anthony found special joy in reviving old engines, bringing back to life cars that others had considered beyond saving. His hands were strong yet precise, his movements confident, and his eyes lit up with joy every time an engine began to run smoothly and cleanly. After work, he loved walking with his wife through the evening streets. They held hands, discussed plans for the future, dreamed of a bigger house, of children who would one day run around the yard. These walks were true happiness for him. In those moments, he felt that life was simple and beautiful, that everything most important was already close at hand. But inside, Anthony lived a thought that gave him no peace. He often caught himself gazing into the distance, beyond the borders of his town, thinking, "I must serve. I must prove that I can protect others." This thought did not come from nowhere. His family had several veterans, an uncle who served in Vietnam, and a grandfather who fought in World War II. Their stories, full of pain and pride, left a mark on the boy's soul. Anthony felt that his life had to be more than just work in the garage and quiet evenings. He wanted to test himself, to see what he was capable of, and to contribute to the defense of his country. When the order came, he did not hesitate. That day, he was sitting in the workshop, his hands covered in oil, a half-repaired carburetor lying on the table. The phone rang, and the voice on the line informed him that he was being called to service. Anthony froze, but inside, there was no fear. There was a sense that everything was happening as it should. He walked out of the workshop, removed his work gloves, and looked at his wife, who was waiting for him at the door. In her eyes, there was worry, but also understanding. She knew this moment was inevitable. "The order has come," he said quietly. She nodded, holding back tears. That evening, they sat together for a long time, saying nothing unnecessary. He held her hand, and she leaned against his shoulder. The room was quiet. Only the clock on the wall counted the minutes. Each minute seemed precious, because they both knew soon everything would change. Anthony looked at her face and thought, "I must return, for her, for us." The next day he packed his things, uniform, boots, a few personal belongings. All of it felt strange and unfamiliar. He placed a photograph of his wife in the bag, so she would always be near, even when the distance became insurmountable. The road to war began early in the morning. A bus filled with young men like him drove along the highway, leaving behind small towns and familiar streets. Silence reigned in the cabin. Each man was lost in his own thoughts. Some looked out the window. Some held letters from loved ones. Some simply sat with their heads bowed. Anthony felt his life changing right then. Yesterday he had been a mechanic, a husband, a man living a simple life. Today he was becoming a soldier. He remembered the smell of oil and metal, the evening walks, his wife's laughter. All of it seemed so distant now, as if from another life. But inside, he held on to those memories tightly, like an anchor that would keep him from being lost in the storm. The bus sped forward, fields, forests, and towns flashing past the windows. Each kilometer carried him farther from the familiar world and closer to the unknown. Anthony looked out the window and thought, "I must prove that I can protect others. I must walk this path." And in that moment he realized his life had truly changed. Everything that had been before the work, the walks, the dreams was left behind. Ahead lay the war. Afghanistan greeted Anthony not as a foreign land, but as a trial. From the very first days he understood. There was no familiar calm here. No quiet streets. No smell of oil from the workshop. The air was thick with dust and tension, and each sunrise brought not hope, but anxiety. The roads were narrow, surrounded by mountains and desert. The sun burned so fiercely, it seemed the earth itself was on fire. The wind carried the scents of dry grass, sand, and something metallic, as if nature itself knew that war reigned here. Anthony, together with other Marines, patrolled villages, guarded convoys, checked roads. Each day looked like the previous one, yet every day hid danger. The slightest sound, a stone clicking, a movement in the distance could mean death. He quickly learned to live on alert. His eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. His ears caught every rustle. Even at night, when they rested in tents, sleep was shallow. Any movement could wake him. And yet, there were moments of humanity. Sometimes, local children approached the soldiers, reaching out their hands for water or sweets. Anthony smiled at them, though inside he felt pain. These children grew up among fear, and he could not give them a peaceful childhood, only a brief smile and a piece of chocolate. The day of the explosion. That day began like hundreds of others. The convoy moved slowly along the dusty road, where every stone could hide danger. The vehicles rumbled with a low hum. Soldiers exchanged short phrases, checked their weapons, adjusted their helmets. The sun stood high, and it seemed the air itself trembled from the heat, turning every breath into a trial. Anthony sat in the armored vehicle, keeping his wife's photograph in his pocket. He often took it out to remind himself why he was here. In the picture she was smiling, the very smile that always brought him back to life. He ran his finger across the photo, as if trying to feel her warmth. Inside the vehicle reigned the usual silence. Each soldier was lost in his own thoughts. Some prayed. Some counted the minutes until the end of the shift. Some simply stared into emptiness. Anthony thought of home, of the workshop, of the smell of oil and metal. These memories were his shield against fear. And then a moment that divided his life into before and after. Explosion. The earth shook, the air filled with fire and thunder. It all happened so quickly the mind had no time to grasp it. The vehicle jolted, metal tore apart. The cries of comrades mixed with the roar of flames. Anthony felt his body burning. Fire engulfed his arms, his face, his chest. The pain was so intense he could not scream, he only opened his mouth. But no sound came. It seemed the very air had turned into a stream of fire tearing him apart from within. He saw comrades falling, someone trying to pull him out of the vehicle. Sparks flashed before his eyes. Smoke covered everything. The taste of blood and metal filled his mouth, and he realized this was the end. But consciousness clung to every detail. He noticed a comrade's hand reaching out to him, heard fragments of words. "Hold on. Get up. Don't give up." These voices sounded distant, as if through a wall of water. The world around turned into chaos. The blast waves scattered earth, stones, and metal. The air was filled with the smell of burning rubber, blood, and dust. The sun, so bright just moments ago, was now hidden behind a cloud of smoke. Anthony tried to move, but his body would not obey. Each motion was met with pain, as though thousands of needles pierced his skin. He felt his clothes sticking to his burned body, his breathing heavy and uneven. At one point, he saw the face of a comrade twisted with fear and determination. The man was pulling him out of the vehicle, shouting something, but the words were lost in the roar. Anthony wanted to answer, but he could not. His lips moved, but his voice drowned in the fire. And then, darkness. Descent into oblivion. The darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was thick, viscous, as if death itself had covered him with a shroud. In that darkness, there was no pain, no fear, only emptiness. But somewhere deep inside remained a spark. That spark was memory. His wife's face, her words, her smile. He clung to it, like a drowning man to a lifeline. Even as consciousness slipped away, he repeated to himself, "I must return. For her, for us." Before finally losing consciousness, Anthony felt movement. Someone was dragging him across the ground. Someone was shouting, giving orders. He heard the sound of a helicopter, the roar of engines, but it was all like a dream. The pain receded, giving way to cold emptiness. He realized, either he would die here, or a new life would begin. A life he could not yet imagine. When Anthony opened his eyes, the world was different. White hospital walls pressed down with sterile emptiness. The light of the lamps was too bright, cutting, as if trying to erase everything that had come before. The smell of antiseptic filled his lungs, leaving a bitter taste, and the cold sheets reminded him. This was not home, not warmth, only the struggle to survive. He tried to raise his hand. The movement was slow, painful, but the most terrifying thing he realized, his fingers were gone. Instead of a familiar palm, bandaged stumps, tightly wrapped in gauze. Panic seized him. He wanted to touch his face, to convince himself it was all a dream, but he felt foreign skin, rough, uneven, covered in scars. The mirror became his enemy. Each time he looked into it, he saw not himself, but a stranger. The face that had once been familiar and loved now seemed a mask carved by fire. Anger, fear, despair surged in waves. He wanted to close his eyes and never open them again. Inside, darkness raged. He heard doctors' voices, saw nurses' silhouettes flickering, felt the touch of cold instruments, but all of it seemed to belong to another world. His world had shrunk to pain and emptiness. And then light. She was there, his wife. She sat beside him, holding his hand despite the bandages and burns. Her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was firm, steady. "You are alive, and that is already a victory." Those words broke through the wall of despair. In them was everything: love, faith, strength. They became the first step toward a new life. Every day in the hospital was a trial. The dressings brought pain. The exercises seemed impossible. But he continued. He learned to walk again, to speak again, to look in the mirror again. The first steps were agonizing. His body trembled. His legs refused to obey. But he forced himself to move. Each motion was a victory. Each minute standing on his feet a small triumph. He learned to eat again, holding a spoon in his bandaged hand. He learned to smile, even when his face would not obey. He learned to accept himself as he had become. And every time his strength failed, he remembered her words, "You are alive, and that is already a victory." One evening, when the ward was quiet, he looked into the mirror again. He understood. His life now had to have meaning. He could not allow himself to be only a victim. He had to become a witness. I am not a victim. I am a witness. I am proof that one can walk through hell and still find light. These words became his mantra. Anthony realized. The war had taken much from him: his health, his appearance, his former life, but it had not taken the most important thing, the chance to live. And now his path lay not on the battlefield, but in the world after war, where he had to find a new meaning. When Anthony woke up in the hospital, he could not understand where he was. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, the steady hum of machines, all of it felt alien, as if he had entered another world. He tried to raise his hand, but instead of the familiar movement, he felt the weight of bandages. When his fingers did not respond, his heart sank. They were gone. He slowly turned his head and saw a mirror on the wall. In the reflection, a stranger. The face that had once been familiar and loved now seemed carved by fire. Rough skin, scars, unfamiliar eyes. Waves of anger, fear, and despair crashed over him. He wanted to close his eyes and never open them again. But she was there. His wife. She sat beside him, holding his hand despite the bandages and burns. Her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was firm, steady. Those words became the first step toward a new life. Every day was a trial. The dressings brought pain. The exercises seemed impossible. But he continued. The first steps were agonizing. His body trembled. His legs refused to obey, but he forced himself to move. Each motion was a victory. Each minute standing on his feet, a small triumph. He learned to eat again, holding a spoon in his bandaged hand. He learned to smile, even when his face would not obey. He learned to accept himself as he had become. The mirror gradually ceased to be an enemy. At first he looked into it furtively, then longer. And one day, for the first time, he did not turn away. He saw not disfigurement, but proof that he had survived. One evening, when the ward was quiet, he looked into the mirror again, and for the first time, he saw not a stranger, but himself changed, yet alive. He understood. His life now had to have meaning. He could not allow himself to be only a victim. He had to become a witness. I am not a victim. I am a witness. I am proof that one can walk through hell and still find light. These words became his mantra. Over time, he began speaking to other veterans. At first, these were small groups, men who, like him, had lost hope. He told them his story about the explosion, the pain, the mirror that had become his enemy, and the words of his wife that had saved him. He saw sparks ignite in the eyes of his listeners. Some smiled for the first time. Some began to believe that life was possible even after war. Anthony joined the Wounded Warrior Project. He helped others cope with trauma and loneliness. His scars became a symbol of strength, not pain. He said, "Every scar is a reminder that I am alive, and I live for those who did not return." His life became a bridge between past and future. The past: war, explosion, hospital, pain. The future: mission, helping others, light. He realized, true victory begins not on the battlefield, but after the war, in life, in love, and in serving others. From personal pain was born strength. From despair, a mission. Anthony understood. His story was not an end, but a beginning. He became a voice for those who were silent, a light for those who had lost hope. Anthony Villarreal walked the path from the fire of war to the light of a new life. His scars became not a mark of pain, but a symbol of strength. He learned to live again, and most importantly, to help others. His story reminds us, true victory does not begin on the battlefield, but after the war, in the heart, in the family, in the mission to serve others. Every word he spoke to veterans, every speech, every look into the eyes of those who had lost hope was proof. A person can walk through hell and still find the light. Anthony lives for those who did not return. His life became a bridge between past and future, between pain and hope. If this story touched you, if you believe that memory and the strength of spirit must live on, support our project. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories of soldiers, their trials, and their victories. Every subscription is a step toward making their voices louder and ensuring their sacrifice is never forgotten.